Flight attendant kicks. Elderly black man from first class, 7 minutes later. No, he's a retired general. The atmosphere inside the cabin of the luxury flight from Paris to Washington, D.C. was serene, filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. Passengers in first class were settling in, sipping champagne and flipping through glossy magazines. Among them was an elderly black man, Davies Brooks, dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. He moved with the slow dignity of someone accustomed to respect but now reliant on a cane to steady his steps. Davies had barely taken his seat when a sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. "Excuse me, sir, but this is first class." Helena, a tall blonde flight attendant with icy blue eyes, barked at him. The room grew quiet as passengers turned to watch. Davies looked up at her, his face calm yet questioning. "I'm aware," he replied evenly, holding out his boarding pass. Helena barely glanced at the pass before crossing her arms. "This must be a mistake. You can't be in this section. Economy is in the back," she snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below." Davies's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't raise his voice. "I believe my seat assignment speaks for itself," he said, his voice steady but firm. But Helena wasn't backing down. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist. You can't just walk in here and claim a first-class seat." The elderly man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Helena reached for his carry-on bag. "That's enough," she said harshly, yanking at the bag. The movement startled Davies, causing him to stumble back slightly, gripping his cane for balance. The other passengers gasped, horrified by the flight attendant's actions. But Helena ignored them. "Security will remove you if you don't move now," she said coldly. Davies straightened, his presence commanding even in the face of humiliation. "I will not be treated this way," he said firmly, his voice steady but filled with quiet authority. Helena sneered, her patience clearly waning. "I don't care who you think you are, sir," she hissed. "You don't belong here." And then, as if on cue, a man in a dark suit approached. He had been watching the scene unfold from a few rows back, his face unreadable. He leaned down to Helena and whispered something in her ear. Her face turned pale. "You might want to check his name," the man said, nodding toward Davies. With trembling hands, Helena picked up the boarding pass she had barely glanced at earlier. Her eyes widened as she read the name. *** General Davies Brooks, Ret. It was a name that carried weight far beyond the confines of that plane. A name that had graced countless headlines for his decades of service, his heroic leadership in the military, and his pivotal role in global diplomacy. Helena's breath hitched as the man in the suit leaned closer and added, "He's not just a retired general, he's a national hero. And you just tried to humiliate him in front of the entire cabin." The realization hit her like a freight train. The murmurs from the other passengers grew louder as the truth began to ripple through the cabin. Helena's face flushed with shame, but it was too late. Davies didn't move from his seat. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, as if weighing the worth of her apology before it even came. The captain, alerted by the disturbance, arrived moments later. After hearing what had transpired, he didn't mince words. "Miss Helena, you are relieved of your duties for this flight," he announced, his voice sharp and unyielding. Helena stammered, trying to explain herself, but the captain cut her off. "General Brooks deserves an apology, but for now, you'll be taking a seat in the jump seat until we land. And when we do, there will be a formal review of your conduct." As Helena was escorted away, her shoulders slumped. Davies finally spoke, his voice calm yet piercing. "You should always remember to treat people with dignity. You never know their story or their rank." The cabin erupted in applause, a standing ovation for the man who had faced injustice with quiet strength. 7 minutes had passed since the initial altercation, but in those moments the trajectory of Helena's career had shifted irrevocably. Davies, ever composed, turned back to his window, gazing out at the horizon as if nothing had happened. For him, this was not about vengeance, but about principle. And as the flight continued, it was clear to everyone on board that they were in the presence of not just a retired general, but a man who embodied the very values Helena had so brazenly disregarded. When the plane landed, the airline issued an immediate apology to General Brooks, with the CEO personally reaching out. Meanwhile, Helena's name trended online, her actions condemned by thousands. As the flight taxied down the runway and ascended into the sky, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin was anything but calm. Helena's abrupt removal left passengers whispering in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally darting toward General Davies Brooks, who sat quietly in his seat. The retired general, however, showed no signs of agitation. Instead, he calmly opened a leather-bound journal, jotting down notes with a steady hand, the consummate picture of composure. But Davies wasn't entirely unbothered. Though his face remained a mask of serenity, his mind replayed the incident. He had faced countless adversities in his life, from leading troops in war zones to negotiating tense international conflicts. Yet being belittled for his race by someone too blinded by prejudice to see beyond the surface had a way of cutting deeper than expected. A soft knock on his table broke his reverie. A younger flight attendant, visibly nervous, leaned down to address him. "General Brooks, I'd like to personally apologize for what you experienced earlier. On behalf of the entire airline, we are deeply sorry for the disrespect you endured." Davies studied her for a moment before offering a small nod. "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Apologies are important. What matters more is what follows them." The attendant hesitated before continuing. "If there's anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." Davies smiled faintly. "A cup of tea will do just fine." As the attendant rushed off, whispers in the cabin grew louder. Several passengers began approaching Davies one by one, expressing their support. A middle-aged woman seated 2 rows back leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to say, what happened was appalling. Thank you for handling it with such grace," she said. Davies nodded, offering a polite smile. "Grace is a discipline, ma'am. One I've spent a lifetime learning." Meanwhile, Helena sat stiffly in the jump seat near the galley, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. The stark contrast between her earlier arrogance and her current isolation was almost poetic. Her mind raced with regret and panic as she realized the gravity of what she'd done. Her thoughts were interrupted when the plane's captain approached her during a brief lull. His face was stern, his tone clipped. "You'll be met by airline officials when we land. I'd start preparing an explanation for your behavior if I were you," he said. "But," Helena began, only for the captain to cut her off with a raised hand. "No excuses, Miss Helena. You disrespected not just a passenger, but a decorated general. That man has done more for this country than you could imagine." By the time the flight was halfway across the Atlantic, the news of the incident had already leaked. A first-class passenger had discreetly recorded the altercation on their phone, and the video was uploaded to social media. Within minutes, it went viral. Comments flooded in. "This is disgusting. Fire her immediately. A retired general. The audacity. Helena needs to be banned from the airline industry altogether." Back in first class, Davies received a visitor he hadn't anticipated. The captain himself stepped into the cabin, his face filled with respect and remorse. "General Brooks, I want to extend my personal apology for what occurred earlier," he said, standing tall beside Davies. "I assure you the airline will address this situation thoroughly, and for what it's worth, it's an honor to have you on this flight." Davies looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Thank you, Captain. Let's hope this becomes a moment of growth, not just for her, but for the airline as well." As the flight neared its destination, the airline's CEO, already alerted to the debacle, prepared for damage control. A limousine was arranged to meet Davies at the gate, and a press statement condemning Helena's behavior was drafted. When the plane landed, Helena was escorted off discreetly, her future with the airline hanging by a thread. The CEO himself greeted Davies at the gate, flanked by a team of senior executives. General Brooks, please accept my deepest apologies on behalf of the airline, the CEO began, his voice tinged with genuine regret. This incident does not reflect our values, and I assure you, the employee in question will face the consequences. Davies studied the man for a moment before replying, "Apologies are a start, but real change requires action. Ensure your staff undergoes proper training to avoid incidents like this in the future." The CEO nodded vigorously. "You have my word, sir." For Davies Brooks, the incident became just another chapter in a life defined by resilience and dignity. For Helena, it was the beginning of an overdue reckoning. Drop a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.